I was in a very bad mental state. The worst I've ever been in my life. I was suicidal. It had happened over 18 months. And luckily for me, I suppose something happened that I explained in the book where my dad was in the right place at the right time to kind of interrupt what I had planned for the day. And then quickly he didn't get out of me what I was going to do, although he knew that something was very wrong. And I think as we talked about when we met, I was phoning home from a phone box, the kind you don't really see anymore, on a Friday in July. And there was probably the last thing on my checklist was to ring home to hear my mother's voice, which was going to be my way of saying goodbye. I'd done everything else. It was a kind of a very warped, logical, not logical list of checking out. And that was the last thing. And I qualified as a chemical engineer from university. So I had a reasonable understanding of, what chemicals you need to damage yourself. Unfortunately, it's not that hard if you're motivated, unfortunately, for the wrong thing. Anyway, my dad answered the phone and said to my mother, he would normally be that chatty in terms of having deep and meaningful conversations on the phone, but he up on some level something was wrong because he just said, "What's wrong?" And I was like, "Nothing." And eventually, long story short, when I broke down, I couldn't tell him what was wrong. I just was crying in a phone box in Cork, southern part of Ireland. And he said, "Is it bad?" And I said, "Yeah, it's very bad. I just can't say out loud what it is." And he convinced me that to stay in the phone box. He said he'd ring me back. He rang me back about 3 or 4 minutes later. And he said, "I want you to ring this number. The guy's name is Morris, friend of mine." And I said, "What does he do?" He said, "He's a counsellor." And I got really annoyed at the time with my dad because I don't need a counsellor. But he promised me that I would ring Morris straight away. So I did. Morris got very quickly to he got me to say out loud what I was going to do, which wasn't easy. And he just said, "Okay, go back to your work, make an excuse, say you're sick, whatever, and get in the car and drive to me over in Waterford, which is about maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours drive from Cork to Waterford. And I will meet you and we'll talk." And that was the start basically of me getting to where I am now, insofar as that there's a lot of people probably listening to this now, maybe who've gone to a therapist or a counsellor of some form for something in their life. It's much more prevalent and common now, which is great. Back then, it wasn't. It was something that at the time I felt shame over. Thankfully, that kind of thing, that kind of stigma is changing, although I still think there's a way to go in our society with that one. And that was the start of a change. And as I explained in the book, Paul, a couple of things happened in that first meeting, which kind of were like a catalyst for stuff, penny drop moments that came later. And one of them was, Morris said to me, "Do you realize you have a mind?" And apart from thinking, "Oh, we're not going to be talking about this rubbish now. Like, I want to talk about my problems. I don't talk about my mind, whatever the hell that is." Yeah. I heard it in two ways. I heard it like, "Oh, I have a mind. But what is that?" And then I thought, well, if I have a mind, I know that's important, but I kind of saw it then, well, if my mind is like my phone, I have a mind, well then it's separate to me, well then who am I? And that second one was a more profound question that was answered years later.
Yeah.
But that started me on a journey. And like what I've discovered since you and I spoke about this when we met for coffee there last week was that, very often, and this is what happens to people, if they go through a crisis, very often that can be a moment of awakening in that crisis where they see something or they decide to make a change. And for me, the change was to take a really initially obsessive interest in my inner world, because I realized, wow, I have a mind. I also have thinking, and it's kind of gone crazy. No wonder I'm feeling so bad. And I started to question, geez, do I need to, I don't actually have to believe my thoughts. And so the idea of the inner CEO, just as a metaphor was, I work mostly with business leaders, business owners, CEOs, entrepreneurs, founders. I've worked with lots of different people, sometimes in sports as well. But the metaphor that I was, the inner CEO is, well, look, if in a real world business or organization, if you need to have a good CEO, and a good CEO makes it their business to understand pretty much what's going on in all the different functions. They make sure that each function is doing what it's meant to do. And then there's some sort of alignment towards some sort of a vision or purpose. And the CEO, their job is to make sure that, yeah, we're all going that way. And I just use that as a metaphor for being inside imagine you have an inner world, inner organization. And I kind of created these kind of cartoon characters called the innies. So just imagine there's all these little creatures running around, managing your different departments, like your memory, your intellect, your identity, your imagination, your intuition, your wisdom. But there's a lack of leadership inside. So for me, there was a complete lack of leadership. I wasn't a CEO. I didn't even know you could be. And basically these guys were inside my thoughts, just running around the place, doing all sorts of things, telling me stuff that ultimately put me into a spiral of depression. And what I started to realize then was, oh, okay. First thing was, can I just get back to ground zero, just survive, feel a little bit better? And I managed to do that. And then I just asked myself a question. I wonder, could you take this further and use it to improve your work, your career, your life? And that's what I started experiment with. And I realized over time that you could. And that's, as you and I would discuss, probably the area of the psychology of achievement, performance management. And that took me so far. And then, obviously I've had a couple of different businesses in different fields. But since probably about 2008, I've been working in this business as my, ShaneCradock.com. And I suppose for the last, I would say 8 years in particular, putting a real emphasis on the inner game in the context of helping leaders to understand in a meaningful way what that means, and then to help them change something that's experiential insofar as that it's not just a concept, it's not just a theory, it's something that they can integrate into their business and their lives, and they go, oh, actually, that actually works for me. I can see a difference. I feel better. And actually, just in passing, do you know that I was listening to an interview with the health expert, Peter, the last days. Yeah, I'd say a lot of your audience would listen to somebody like himself. He's a very interesting guy. But if it's okay with you, I just want to share a new thought that I had in relation to this. Please. And we just see where it goes, because it's just fresh. I haven't even said this really to anybody else. So he was just talking about health 1.0, health 2.0, and health 3.0 as an idea, right? And so what he was saying was health 1.0 was kind of back in the dark ages where, it was a lot of stuff to do with juju and magic and leeches, and we didn't really understand the unseen world of viruses, bacteria. So medicine and health 2.0 was where we went, hang on, we need to get a little bit more scientific here. There's an unseen world. It was very much about preventing those diseases that were caused by a lack of awareness of what was going on in reality.
Lack of cleanliness, all these sort of simple things.
Exactly, yeah. So it's even simple things of, a woman having a baby, and the mortality rates were very high because it was dirt, there was lack of cleanliness here. That's medicine 2.0, health 2.0. We kind of cleaned up all that from a better understanding of reality. And he was just saying that he sees health and medicine 3.0 now coming in, which is really more to do with the science and art of longevity.
Yeah.
Where we're taking it on. It's not just about prevention. Now it's necessarily about elongation and actually using science and what we know now in more detail to take it even further, to extend life in a much better way. And, in relation to the inner side, I actually see something similar on the inner side at the moment as well. So I see mental 1.0, mental 2.0, and I see an emergence of mental 3.0. So when I share that with you?
Please, yes.
Yeah, so I think it's logical enough. I think like mental 1.0 was where, as you would know, most of the models at one point, when it came to the mind, mental health, not so much mental performance, even though it was the foundation of it, was very much geared around problems in mental health. So a lot of the psychiatrists were born out of studying mental illness.
Yeah.
And that was the framework and the foundation of how they looked at psychology.
Are you saying the mental illness was there just to fix it? No preventative? Is that what you mean?
Well, part A is yes, there was no, they had their own theory about how to fix it, right? But the foundation and study of psychology was all about people who had mental problems from the doctor's perspective, right? So that was the foundation and the prism by which they looked at psychology. So it was all based on pretty much what's wrong with people. And then somebody asked the question, well, hang on, do people who are high performers, optimists, people who thrive in life, do they think any differently? That was Martin Seligman. And so he asked that question, which seems very obvious. Nobody had ever asked the question. And from that, he actually got funded for very pioneering research by an Irish guy called Chuck Feeney. And essentially he's pioneered what is now known as positive psychology. And, that also kind of...
So just to check you this, so what he discovered is there was an actual difference between the psychology of people with good mental health and poor mental health.
Yeah, it was a massive difference. Yeah. And so he was doing a lot of research with initially the US Army and soldiers who had PTSD, because that was kind of his background. But then he just said, well, hang on, like soldiers that come back from war zones who seem to be fine, what are they doing differently? And they started to study them in terms of, okay, mentally are they doing that? So he created all these different frameworks, very scientific. But that was the start of what has become a massive area, even for coaches, which is around the study of positive psychology, which is not the same now, just for your listeners, as positive thinking.
Yes.
It's really more to do with understanding that.
So could you just clarify that difference there, the difference between positive psychology and positive thinking?
Sure. Well, look, positive thinking is just like, the simplest version is somebody say, well, I'm feeling bad. No, think I'm feeling good. It's just like, to me, it's probably more like the famous book, The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale, is a classic book. And it's really more about, look, just change your thinking.
So have a positive thought but ignore the reality of what you're actually experiencing.
Yes, pretty much.
Thought will change the experience.
Exactly.
Or the circumstances.
So he went further than that in terms of positive psychology. Really is, and this is just my description of it, is an understanding that every human has a mind, and within those mind we have patterns of thinking. So Paul has a personality, Shane has a personality. You grow up a certain way. We grew up in Ireland. We have different things happen to us, and we've got certain traits. And there's a foundational approach. For example, how you and I might handle stress, how we look at goals, how we communicate with people, even how we think about speaking here in public or whatever. Like there's a pattern for everything, and most of us never think, well, that's just me. So what he kind of shone a light on was, okay, well, look, there's kind of like pessimistic traits and there's optimistic traits, kind of in a very simple way.
Clarify, we're talking about traits that you are either born with genetically, or that you've behavioral traits that you've picked up over the 2 decades of living with a family or something. That's the baseline traits.
It might, no, I think it would probably more show, they were more looking at habits of thinking. So
what I'm asking is, my nature is I'm an optimistic person. I see opportunity. It's, glass half full. That's just my nature. I think I have built on that nature. I just like you build a muscle, but I think it was always my nature. And I may have chosen to strengthen that nature, but I probably didn't choose that nature. Now, I could have a sibling or someone who grew up the same area who by their nature doesn't have that lean, is the half glass empty person. So is there something?
Yeah, well, that was me. You see, that was me. Wow. That's what I realized. So I realized, okay, when I got into that, I was like, oh, hang on.
So this was your predisposition, is what you're saying?
Okay, yeah. So what he showed was, he wrote a book, which is still a classic. I think it should be a book in every house, called Learned Optimism. And what he was saying was that actually you can learn optimism. Yes. And actually then they showed that a lot of research, and like this has gone now over.
And this is where we go to positive psychology, this learned optimism.
Pretty much. That was the starting point for it. So like they have over 30 years now of tracking different results and research now. So they've shown that like optimists tend to live longer, have better lives,
be more successful, all of these things. Yeah.
All that kind of stuff. But here's the thing, it can be learned.
It can be learned.
And this is
what you're saying is, even if it's not your nature, because obviously I suppose one of the things, and we're both to some degree, I'm going to use the word self-help, but we're both in that business of speaking to people to encourage people to think better, live better. And when I listen to people, and certainly anyone else speak on the podcast or whatever, the essential ingredient for me is that someone is speaking from learned experience. Because really, if what you're telling me is I've read all these books, is like, I'm sorry, I honestly don't give a shit because you don't understand it. I think because you stood on that day going, this is my last day, I'm ending it, I make this call. Look at Providence, whatever led you down that road, but you were that person. And I'm just thinking there will be lots of people listening to this show who there may be people at the point you're at, but there certainly will be people who are facing difficult circumstances and are in that challenging situation. And it's easy for them to think, well, that's easy for him. He doesn't live my life. And so I think that's really important that you were at that point of pretty much as low as you can get. And you were, and you were able to build from that, which I think is, I just think that's a crucial experience to have, because it gives you in my view, it gives you the right to speak about it.
Yeah. Well, that's fair enough. And look, I think, I'm assuming most of your audience are entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs. Yeah. In my own experience, I do think that, if we're talking about the area of mental health or whatever, people might think, well, that's not relevant to me right now. I feel fine. Mm. But I would say to my clients, no, like most people have a very narrow narrow view of mental health. Mental health to me is on a continuum. At the lowest end, where I was, suicidal ideation, right? Or, like maybe there's other ways, there's other things that are just as bad. Yeah. But for me, that was my worst. But at the higher end, you're talking about activating a state of mind that allows you to go more into the flow, brings in more creativity, which then allows you to be a better communicator. You're more inclined to sell better, lead better. Whereas in my experience, most people, even probably listening to this, they think, well, look, I'm feeling okay. You see, to me, okay is in the middle of the continuum, that's just average mental health. And so if nothing else, what I'd look to consider is, hey, listen, there's way more available to most people. And that's the beauty of what we're both interested in terms of, this is what I realized in my journey was, look, I started off in kind of like what you might call traditional business coaching, consultancy and things like that. This stuff I kept in the background. It was private. I was working on myself, working on my own game in life and business. And I kind of cut my teeth then working in, the stuff that you and I discussed, like things like strategy, leadership, delegation, all the standard stuff to make a business work. But what I realized as I was with my clients was that there was something missing sometimes, a lot of the time, or sometimes when a difficult period would come and they take a hit, very often they might find it difficult to bounce back. And then sometimes I might have, say, 5 people that I'm talking to, say, even in a workshop or kind of a forum, and one of them will go off and make it happen with the same information that the others wouldn't. I was thinking, why is that? And was it to do with confidence? In some cases it was. Was it to do with stress? In some cases it was. Was it to do with mentally getting distracted? But the thing that all of those things have in common is that they're all inner.
Yes. Like they're all happening inside.